What's up, everybody? Welcome back to a brand new episode of Bonsai-U. In this edition, we're going to be talking about my giant European penis. Okay. I didn't mean that kind of penis. I mean this kind of penis, or pinus, depending on where you are in the world. This is a Pinus sylvestris, or Scots pine. Now, this tree has a really interesting history. It was grown by a good friend of mine, Bill Valavanis, who most of you probably already know. He runs International Bonsai up in Rochester, New York. This tree was grown by Bill for the last 40 years. And I was lucky enough last year to acquire this tree and bring it down to my garden, Eisei-en, here in Nashville, Tennessee. Now, as you can see, the tree has adjusted well to the climate down here. It's much hotter, much more humid in Tennessee than it is up in New York, and the tree has adjusted well to being down here. Now, right now, it's spring here in Tennessee, and the problem is this tree has put out elongated candle growth. So, I want to talk to you guys about how to manage this type of growth on a single flush pine. Okay, so before we jump into the actual technique of managing these candles, I want to talk to you about two big broad categories of pines first. So we've got single flush pines and double flush pines. Now, in general, what this means is with a single flush pine, they produce one flush of growth per year, where a double flush pine will produce two flushes of growth per year if induced to do so. So in other words, if we apply a technique or some stimuli to a tree, it will produce a second flush of candle growth in one growing season. Now, trees that fall into the double flush pine category are really few and far between. A majority of the pines that we're going to work with in bonsai culture that fall into this category are really just going to be Japanese black pines and Japanese red pines. Now, here in the United States, we're currently experimenting with some of our native pines like Virginia pine and pitch pine to see if we can produce a second flush of growth with those and if those will fit into that double flush pine category. But other than that, a vast majority of the pines that you're going to be working with in bonsai culture are going to fall into the other category, which is single flush pines. So these are pines that if you remove the candles in the summer, they're not going to produce a second flush of growth, and you could potentially kill the branches on those trees. Now, this tree right behind me here, Pinus sylvestris, falls into that single flush category. So what that means is we cannot completely remove the candles in the summer because the growth on those branches may not produce a new bud, may not produce a new candle, and it might die. We might actually kill that branch, which of course we don't want to happen. So with this particular kind of tree, there are other techniques that we need to employ and apply to these trees to manage the candle growth and balance energy throughout the tree. So I want to show you guys exactly how to do that with this tree right behind me here. Okay, so before we make any cuts on this tree, I want to explain what a candle is, and then also I want to talk a little bit about the timing for performing this technique. So what a candle is this growth right here, this elongating growth that's coming out of our needles from last year. These candles on the entire tree are what we're going to be pruning back as part of this process. Now, the timing for performing this kind of technique is all going to be dictated by your particular climate. Here in Nashville, Tennessee, we perform this technique usually in mid to late April. If the climate is warmer in your area and you warm up earlier in the spring season, obviously you're going to be performing this technique a little bit earlier, and vice versa if you stay cooler later into the spring season. So the way to identify exactly when to prune the candles is based on the shape and size of the candles themselves. So in order to show you what I mean, I'm going to zoom in on some of these candles and we're going to talk in more detail about what they should look like before you perform this type of technique. All right, let's take this candle right here as an example. So at the very base here, you can see the growth from last year. These needles down here, this is last year's growth. This green shaft right here is the new growth from this year. So this is our new candle. Now, out of the sides of the candle, you can see these little bitty nubs starting to emerge. These are our new needles for this year. These are going to elongate during the course of this growing season and turn into needles that look like these from last year. So the best indicator as for the timing to perform this type of candle pruning on a single flush pine is when you start to see those needles emerge from the side of the candle. Now, the reason that we want to see these little nubs start to emerge here is because this is going to give us an indication as to where we can cut the candle back to. Now, on the entirety of the tree, we're going to be cutting all of these candles back to basically an average length throughout the entire tree, and that's going to help balance energy. But in order to establish where the average length is, we need to assess exactly where those little nubs are starting to emerge out of the new candles. So if you take a look at the very base of the candle down here, You've got the old growth here. You've got a section that's about 1/4 of an inch, maybe 1/8 of an inch or so, where there are no little nubs. This in Japanese is called a jiku. It's basically just an area where there are no buds, there are no needles. It's just the shaft of the candle, and then as you move up out onto the candle, the nubs start to appear, and those are your needles. If we take a single flush pine and we come all the way back down here and cut below where those new needles start to emerge, it's likely not to produce a new bud in this area, and it could potentially kill the branch tip here. So what we want to do is make sure that we're cutting somewhere above where the first set of needles is starting to emerge on the candle. So in other words, you can see the first set of needles right here. As long as we cut slightly above that, somewhere in this area up here, that's going to then produce a new bud at the tip and continue to grow next year. So in other words, we're not going to kill off the branch tip. So this is precisely why you want to see those new needles start to emerge from the candle, because that's going to give you the bottom line indicator as to how low you can cut that candle back. So now that you know the visual indicators as to when to perform this kind of technique on a single flush pine, let's talk about how to perform the technique. Now, before we make any cuts, what I want to do is go through and assess the entire tree, looking at each of the candles and determining which ones are strong, which ones are medium strength, and which ones are weak. Now, obviously, the longer and thicker the candle, the stronger it is. The shorter and skinnier it is, the weaker it is. What we're going to do to balance the energy on this tree is cut back all of the strong and medium strength candles down to the average size of the smallest candles. This will help balance energy throughout the entire tree and give us an even growth pattern on the entire bonsai. So again, to make this more clear, I'm going to zoom in on a section of the tree and show you exactly what I'm talking about. Okay, so here's a great example of all 3 types of candles on this tree all in one area. Down here you can see the smallest candles. These are our weaker candles. You can see up here, these are our long extended candles, which are our strong candles. And then back over here, this is right in between those 2 in size. So this would be our medium strength candle here. So what we're going to do, as I said, is cut down the strong candles and the medium strength candles to the average size of our smallest or weakest candles here to balance energy. So again, what that looks like, let's take the largest candle here first. What that looks like is we're going to be cutting this down to about that same length. But again, we want to make sure that we're cutting above the new needles for this year. So we're going to come down to the base of the candle here, start at the bottom, we're going to come up, we're going to come just above where those new needles are starting to emerge, and that length right here is going to be about the same length as our weaker candles down here. So I'm going to go right in between here and cut this back. Now if you notice here, I'm not cutting through the new needles, I'm cutting in between the new needles. I don't want to damage these, I don't want to cut these in half. I want to leave those intact, so again, they'll elongate and we'll get a bud set at the end here for next year. So let's perform that same technique on the medium strength candle here. So we're going to come down to the base, start at the base here, move out. You can see this is the first needle right here on this candle. So we can come above that out into this area, again, to about the same length as our weak candles here and cut back. Right? We're going to do this on the entire tree to balance energy. So here's another situation that you'll probably encounter relatively often with single flush and double flush pines. You'll notice here that we've got a long candle. This is kind of a medium strength candle here. And at the base, you've got 1, 2, 3 smaller candles that are all emerging from the same point. Now, if we leave all of these here, what's going to happen is this is going to start to swell at the base, which is obviously not an ideal situation. So in order to prevent that from happening and to balance the energy, we're going to eliminate 2 of these 4 candles here. Anytime you come across an area where there are more than 2 candles, so more than a bifurcation, we want to cut back to just 2. So that's going to help us avoid swelling. Now in this case, again, what we're doing is trying to balance energy, so we're cutting everything back to the average length of the smallest candle. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and remove this medium candle all the way back to the base here. And now you can see we've still got 1, 2, 3 coming out of the same area. So in this case, I'm going to remove the candle coming up out of the top in favor of the 2 lateral buds here. All right, so we'll cut this one out right in the center there. And now we've got 2 even-sized candles here that are laterally oriented. This is the ideal situation, and we're going to employ this technique across the entire tree as well. So here's our Scots Pine after cutting back the candles as part of our energy balancing process in spring. Now you'll probably notice that the tree has a lot fewer branches than we started with as well. I actually cleaned out a lot of the unnecessary branches as part of this process, and I'm going to be covering the full styling of this tree in an upcoming episode of Bonsai-U. But just know that this type of technique, cutting back the candles in spring, is something that you need to apply to your single flush pines on a yearly basis. Look forward to talking to you guys in the next episode of Bonsai-U, and we'll do a follow-up of this tree in the fall as the new buds start to form. So we'll see you guys in the next episode.